So it's official. The breakout clause has been triggered, meaning that if a deal is not made by 2019, the British Grand Prix at Silverstone will be off the F1 calendar. What's up, guys? Welcome back to White Lines F1, and as I said, the breakout clause has been triggered. So basically, I'm going to talk through what this effectively means, and why it's happened, and what are the outcomes that are going to come from this, depending on how it develops. So basically, the simple reason for why this has to happen is because past 2 years lately, I think the Silverstone Grand Prix has generated a net loss of about £7.5 million. That is very bad. That is very, very bad. The Silverstone Grand Prix has very, very small profit margins, so they don't really make that much money off of the Grand Prix. And basically, as a result of that and other factors, they're basically just losing so much money every time they host a Grand Prix. 7.5 million or 7.6, whatever it was, over a 2-year period is terrible. And the simple reason why they're losing all this money is because back in, I don't know when it was, around 2010 or whenever it was, I can't remember off the top of my head, when the contract was signed. Basically, back then when they signed the contract to make the British Grand Prix at Silverstone, it was in a bit of a rush. They didn't have much time, and the only offer that was on the table was this deal that basically meant that the cost would go up 5%. It was like an escalator deal. So basically, the price would go up by 5% every single year, and as a result, every year, if that price is going up 5% every time, it's going to cost more and more. And they were sort of forced to do that because they didn't really have much space for negotiation. There was no other deal on the table at the time, so it was a very short-term fix to a long-term issue. Which is why that we're now at in this situation where by 2019 Silverstone may be off the calendar, and that would be a great shame because Silverstone Grand Prix is the most historic track on the calendar. Because I think I'm right in saying that the first ever Grand Prix was at Silverstone. I'm pretty sure that's right. So you can imagine that they might want to keep that. It's probably, Monaco is the most glamorous, but I think it's fair to say that Silverstone's the most prestigious. If they had won the first, or if not the absolute first Grand Prix ever, and the fact that they get about 350,000 fans live at the track every single year. This year is going to be yet again a near sellout. Obviously, they're going to want to keep this track. There's no one benefiting from Silverstone being off the calendar. The drivers don't want that. The teams don't want that. There are 10 teams. 6 of those teams are have their factories in England. And if you look online, there's like a I think it's like F1 Valley. I can't remember what they call it. Basically, it's like this route around that basically is where all the 6 garages. So that's McLaren, Williams, Mercedes, Force India, Manor, and someone that's gone off Red Bull, sorry. So them 6 of those teams. I nearly forgot, actually. That would have been really awkward. And so obviously none of those teams, amongst the other teams as well, they really will not want that. Obviously we had Lotus as well and Caterham back in the old days, well, not old days, last year, previous years, who used to be F1 teams. Obviously for money issues they had to leave, but they were in Britain as well. So the British input into motorsport and into F1 is massive. In fact, I can't remember the exact one, but it's one of the biggest motorsport divisions or motorsport industries in Europe. So you can imagine, I think it's like 45,000 people are employed in the UK motorsport industry. This would be such a loss if we lost the British Grand Prix at Silverstone. Or there are obviously other issues in general that can be used, but nobody wants to lose that. The BRDC, obviously, who own Silverstone, they don't want to see that lost. Liberty Media don't want to see that lost. And I think Zach Brown actually sent out a bit of a plea to Zach Brown is CEO McLaren's F1 division, saying that. Basically a bit of a plea to Liberty Media: if a deal can't be done, can you buy Silverstone and put it on the track? Because we're kind of desperate. Everyone wants Silverstone to stay on the Grand Prix and stay on the calendar, and obviously myself included, obviously. And for me, I think it's just That's one of the longest tracks one of the longest tracks on the calendar. I think it's one of the most exciting races, especially because of how dynamic the weather always is. It's a fantastic track, going through the S's, Abbey, Cops, mate, and the back straight, and we've seen so much drama at that track. It absolutely never disappoints, and I just think it would be so horrible if we lost Silverstone. But if a deal can't be done, and I personally believe F1 can be done, and believe there is the time. We've got to 2019, so they've got those 2 years to still get some form of deal, just to effectively save it. I think it will be done. And the thing is, you've got there are other options, of course, that if it can't be kept at Silverstone, it can be still kept within Britain. So obviously we've got Brands Hatch and Donington, and for those of you guys who don't know, Brands Hatch has had British Grand Prix at their track, I think about 12 times over like a 25-year period when they shared it actually with Silverstone. So on 12 occasions, Brands Hatch actually had the British Grand Prix, and I think it was actually Gerhard Berger, who, for those of you guys who don't know, he was an F1 champion actually, but he came third in the F1 championship on 2 separate occasions, both times with Ferrari, I believe. So he was not a bad F1 driver, to say the least. I think he actually said that Brands Hatch was his favourite F1 circuit on the calendar. So obviously back then the cars were very different, much less downforce, considerably slower compared to what they are this season in 2017, when they are far quicker than many the fastest F1 cars in history, of course. But the cars were very different back then, and of course they were a lot thinner, or thinner is not the right word, I guess. Narrower is a better way of saying it. Obviously this year the cars are extremely wide, so maybe there will have some adjustments needed at Brands Hatch, and I don't think personally it would be as much of a spectacle, but it's a viable option that the F1 Grand Prix maybe potentially at the British Grand Prix rather will migrate to Brands Hatch. But of course there is Donington, and that's a fantastic sweeping F1 track, and that had the European Grand Prix once. I think that was in '97, possibly. I'm going off the top of my head. So again, that's another track that is a viable option, but in both instances, to me, I just don't think they'd be the same as I think there would be a lot of development needed for those tracks to be at all like what Silverstone is, and especially because Donington has got quite a history. It's had a lot of turmoil, shall we say, when it comes to money. So I don't know how brilliant it is if you're saying that we don't want to go to Silverstone anymore because of money issues. We're now going to go to Donington, which is a track that's got a history of money issues. Obviously now they're owned, I think by the same company who own Brands Hatch, but I may be wrong, so don't quote me on that one. But so they've got they're stable at the moment when it comes to money and so on. But if it was to become an F1 circuit, I would assume there would be a bit of renovation needed to develop the track to make it viable to the standards, but I don't know for sure. You have to see you'd have to check what grade it is of track. So those options are both viable though, and if it was to move, the circuit was to become the British Grand Prix was to move to those tracks, it could be done absolutely. I just think it would be a bit of a step backwards. Personally, I think if we were to change the Grand Prix instead of Silverstone, I personally would say we should have something completely new. And in that case, we can bring in Mr. Sadiq Khan, Mayor of London, who says sure, we can have an F1 Grand Prix on the streets of London. And you know what? A bit of a security issue. Obviously, there'll be a lot of technicalities they have to go through, and a lot of checks, and a lot of things they have to do, and see if it's actually literally if it's actually possible, if it can actually be done. But I'm all for that. A Grand Prix on the streets of London, that would be insane. It would be a narrow circuit, lots of competition on the street. The noise echoing off the buildings. I think we've got Monaco where it's like that. We've got Singapore where it's like that. We've got Baku like that. I'd say less much like Baku, but certain sections in Baku, like the castle section and so on, you do get that. I think that would be so. It would be wonderful if it could technically be done, and actually end up being done, that we had a British Grand Prix that was actually in the streets of London. I think that couldn't bring the sport closer to the fans than bringing it to the nation's capital. Literally on people's doorstep. So I'd be absolutely all for that. I think in the ideal world we have Silverstone Grand Prix remains, and I think considering the fact that absolutely nobody is benefiting from the fact or from the possibility of Silverstone Grand Prix leaving the calendar, I think everyone, and how wonderful that track is, and the history we've got at that track. I think it's fairly simple to say it needs to stay on the calendar, and I think Zach Brown's maybe onto something, saying Liberty Media should potentially just buy it out to keep it, because I assume they would be able to afford it, and I'd say if it's the most important track on the calendar, because of the fact that the majority of the teams are from England, and that is their home Grand Prix. It's the closest to the fans and so on, and the history that it's had. I think it needs to stay at Silverstone. But I think if it wasn't to be there, streets of London, why not? Why say no? It'd be dangerous. It'd be narrow. It'd be on everyone's doorsteps. The sound would be booming off all the walls and the buildings, and it'd be in the nation's capital. There is such a massive demand to get seats out there, and I think it would be a massive attraction, not just for the sport but for the country, to put it in London. So, and we saw how well F1 was the F1 Live in London was received yesterday. That was just absolutely incredible. So I think Silverstone needs to stay, but if not, I think London is the best option. But obviously, there's a lot of things that need to go into that. But that's me simply covering the news and sort of talking about why and where and how and so on. That's pretty much all I've got to say. If you have got your own opinion on this, and you've got other information you want to drop and maybe start a discussion about where you think it should go, drop it down in the comments. Maybe I'm going to put a poll up, say where you think it should be. In fact, why not? I'm going to put up a poll to ask where you think the British Grand Prix should be held on the streets of London, in Donington, in Brands Hatch, or remain at Silverstone. I would assume the majority would say remain at Silverstone. That's what I would vote for. But hey, don't listen to me. Throw your own opinion. But nonetheless, comment below anything else you want to talk about. Nonetheless, thanks so much for watching, guys. If you ever enjoyed this video, leave a like, share this video. If you want to stay tuned for more videos, hit the subscribe. Thanks again, and I will see you on the next one. The next one is Silverstone, so look at that. It's like as if I planned this.